Hello, buddy. All right. Welcome to the Mikestand. Today, of course, is Thursday, February the 12th, 2026. So, of course, we're going to give people a chance to come in before we get started. Friendly reminder, everybody, of course, if you haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See when we get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. Oh, anyways, we're just, as I said, just waiting around to give people a chance to show up. Hopefully, everybody's having a good day. Let me see if there's maybe more people who are online right now. See if I can send the link along to them. Get them to join the conversation, as it were. No, I guess not. Alright, so anyways, let's see now. So, alright, well, let's see. 2 minutes. Give it another minute here. So, la, 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 la. Casper, the friendly ghost, the friendliest ghost you know. He laughs and plays, sings and dances all day. Friendliest ghost you'll see. Alright, let's see. Anyways, alright, well, so I'll talk a little bit about what's on tap for tonight, a little early tonight here. So tonight, got one article I'm going to go over from Bleeding Fool. And apparently there are people getting upset with IDW as just simply because due to the fact they're struggling. I guess they've been heisting some IPs, as it were. So talk about dream theft, huh? But anyways, so we're going to go over that article. Also, of course, we'll get caught up on all the latest pro wrestling. Look back to, of course, last night's Dynamite, the Go Home Dynamite before the Go Home Dynamite before this Saturday's Grand Slam Australia. We'll look ahead to tonight's TNA Impact on AMC, the final Go Home Impact before tomorrow night's No Surrender pay-per-view, and also look ahead to tonight's Ring of Honor action. And we'll probably also just go over real quickly, of course, what's going on tomorrow, with tomorrow night's No Surrender and Saturday's Grand Slam. So, and I'll preview those again tomorrow as well. Then we'll wrap up with This Day Needs History at the very end. So there we go with all that. So now we're at the 4.5 minute mark. So why don't we go ahead then and get started? So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started then. Let me go grab the article here we're going to go over tonight. And again, for one more friendly reminder to everybody before we get started. If you haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I will try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So let's get going on this article. Struggling comic publishers, desperate IP heist, angers artist. Article by Jameson Ashley, published today. ID Comics and Entertainment, Alien Books. IDW Publishing is taking a beating from comic creators this week after details surfaced about its new so-called quote-unquote creator-owned program. The company, best known for licensed titles like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Star Trek, has reportedly begun demanding full ownership of new creator projects. Oh boy. In short, artists and writers would get royalties but give up their rights entirely. Especially with the emergence of crowdfunding the last 4 or 5 years. I don't think no artist, no comic creator at this point is going to take that kind of a deal. I could just see the multiple birds flipped, right at IDW right now. It's like, talk about not reading the room, for crying out loud. Boy. Especially when you're considering that a lot of people are finding some success with getting their stuff out through the indie comic scene and through like sites like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and Fund My Comic. We've been of course we looked at another edition of the Indie Comic Showcase last night, in fact, if you guys remember. So I think a lot of comic creators with that kind of offer would just go on a very, very hard pass. Anyways, for an industry that still doesn't treat its talent well, that's saying something. No kidding. In a recent earnings call, CEO David Jonas revealed that creators must now produce their comics on spec under IDW's new model. That means artists and writers pay out of pocket for art, lettering, and production before submitting finished books. In the call, he attributed this to their failure to be profitable enough, admitting IDW doesn't, quote, have the barometer of success to demonstrate that it would be wise for us at this time to take on the financial risk, unquote. Basically, they're running themselves into the ground, and it sounds like to me they're running themselves into the ground, and they're blaming the comic creators for it. I could just see a long line of walkouts happening in the next few months here. Of all the major comic book companies right now, I think everybody's been saying this for the last 3-4 years that IDW. In fact, I'm kind of surprised that we even have an article on IDW right now, because everything I've heard in the last few years is that they're like dying. They're dying out. So they're dying out like the dinosaurs did long ago. So. Anyways, continuing on here, let's see. Under this model, the creator submits the books, then IDW reviews the work through its internal team to see if it passes muster. Only approved projects will earn royalties, but IDW still gets to claim 100% IP ownership regardless. Yeah, I would think that this is going to lead to a massive walkout. Basically, IDW is acting like the devil and asking their comic creators to sell their soul to them. And I don't really see that happening. CEO David Jonas made it clear on the earnings call the company won't risk upfront cost without proven sales potential. This setup flips traditional publishing on its head, puts all the financial burden on talent already struggling in a dying industry. And in a way, it echoes the worst work-for-hire traps that drove legends like Jack Kirby away from Marvel decades ago. Yeah, I mean, this kind of thing is just going to push people more towards crowdfunding. I mean, I'm sure a lot of these comic creators are seeing, are seeing the success that some of their peers are having through crowdfunding, like Chuck Dixon, like Mike Barron, and all that, and then they come back to IDW and see this, and they're going, yeah, I think I might want to start publishing my own books. Screw this. Screw IDW. I'm out of here. Granted, it's probably easier said than done, but I'm sure at least some of their creators will probably seriously be thinking about that over the next few months. Last summer, the CEO outlined their shifting original content plans, but they weren't this dramatic. Quote, when IDW Originals launched, there was a pretty robust catalog of titles, and the spending, I would say, was substantial, certainly relative to the value that was being generated for shareholders, unquote, Jonas said. Quote, and so we cut back meaningfully on IDW Originals program, especially on the ones that were substantially costly, unquote. One might think licenses like Star Trek and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles would keep IDW thriving. Well, the problem there is that, well, IDW's been, because they've lost I think the GI Joe, they've lost what, GI Joe, Transformers, and My Little Pony in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's just a matter of time before these properties probably go too, if IDW can't, and a lot of this has to do, I think, with just the writing too of them. Instead, under group editor of licensing Heather Antos. I know Yellow Flash probably says a lot about Heather Antos, but it has been one flop after another. Hired to lead the profitable licensed comics line, Antos oversaw losses of major deals and steady declines while IDW bled talent and cash. Now her team pushes books from connected identitarian creators that no one wants. Basically, the interpretation there, I think, is these people who sit there and just try to just push DEI stuff on fans that don't want it. Right? We've been seeing a lot of that. Some of these comic creators will try to insert that stuff in the story, and people will just turn away from it in droves. Hence, what they say, bleeding talent and cash. Small wonder the company claws for any IP it can grab. Bye-bye. Oh, boy. The latest controversy exploded after IDW CEO David Jonas spoke on a recent investor call. He admitted that the company can't afford to pay for new comics up front, saying, quote, we don't have the barometer of success to demonstrate that it would be wise for us at this time to take on the financial risk, unquote. Now, while that may be a very sound financial thinking, it's kind of a like a it's like a stain on the right. It's stain to the writers because now they're basically being blamed for the books not selling. Now, granted, if they're shoveling out stuff that people don't want to read, that uh, that doesn't help things either. But Jonas then added, "quote I do think that we'll achieve growth in those areas. I just don't think there's much we can do outside of getting lucky and being in the right place at the right time and having a hit book," unquote. Not exactly the pep talk investors want to hear. Jonas tried to sell the new model as forward thinking, explaining, quote, "We focused on generating internally generated content where IDW will have pretty much for the first time company owned company owned content," unquote. Translation: creators make it, IDW owns it. He says IDW is, quote, focused on generating internally generated content where IDW will have pretty much for the first time company owned content, unquote. Yeah, again, this is not gonna. This is. I don't think at this point, with the surge in crowdfunding, with the surge of independent indie comics, I don't think this format is gonna fly for very long. It's like, it reminds me of a Schoolhouse Rock song. They go down, 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 gravity, going down, down, down. uh, let's see. Jonas noted, quote, creating crime stories, hero stories, and new horror stories, unquote. For the record, crime, hero, and horror aren't quote unquote new genres. They're just cheaper ways for a publisher to bet on someone else's imagination. Yeah, and well, because again, it's pretty formulaic in a lot of ways. Some people might even call it creatively lazy, but hmm. And again, friendly reminder to everybody, if you haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So, with that being said, continuing on with the article here, this model goes against what many smaller presses promote as fair practice. Most creators take less money up front so they can keep their characters, stories, and long term licensing options. That's how Image Comics and others gain trust in the first place. Yet industry veterans note that the promise of quote unquote creator owned often vanishes once corporate accountants step in. Many say IDW's new plan repeats the worst parts of comic history. For decades, writers and artists at Marvel and DC handed over full ownership of icons like Superman, Batman, and Spider Man in quote unquote work for hire deals and paid only per page. Um yeah, in fact I think like some of the stories revolving around Superman and Batman, like story story of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster has become a pretty well-known one in the last few years. So is the story of Bill Finger, you know, where these guys weren't getting their proper credit for many years. Wasn't in fact in the case of Siegel and Schuster, they didn't really even start getting proper credit until like about 20 years ago. back in the mid 2000s, around the time that Justice League Unlimited was airing on TV and all that. So maybe even further back, maybe even 30 years ago, back in the 90s. So, anyways, let's see now. Those same companies now rake in billions from film franchises, while original creators see little to nothing. Ryan Otley, co-creator of Invincible, didn't mince words after hearing about IDW's move, suggesting artists should, quote-unquote, just work for Image. It was a sharp jab, considering Skybound, co-founded by Otley's collaborator Kirkman, is accused of similar IP hoarding. According to colorist William Crabtree and original Walking Dead artist Tony Moore, who each sued Kirkman for tricking them into signing away their royalties and rights. Still, Otley's point stands. Talent in comics seems destined to choose between exposure and ownership, rarely both. Yep. Which is kind of a poopy deal. For a publisher that just clawed its way out of financial trouble, IDW's message sounds desperate. Jonas's comments, yeah, and it's going to probably get more desperate because I'm sure over the next year or over the next few months, maybe a year or two, you're going to start seeing a lot of the comic creators who are currently working for IDW, basically collectively flipping the bird and walking right out the door and never going back. Maybe they will go to maybe they will go to Image, or maybe they'll even try their hand at at the indie scene and just do crowdfunding, because as we all know, crowdfunding has been getting real big in the last few years because of situations like this, right? Sure, there are creators in the chat or in the watching right now. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Jonas' comments gave the impression of a man throwing anything at the wall to keep investors calm. When the head of a company says success comes down to quote-unquote luck, while telling creators they can't own their art, it's hard to picture a thriving future. Yeah, no kidding. Then again, maybe IDW's next big hit will ride the wave of outrage. Stranger things have happened in comics. Not likely. So Jameson here hit on some pretty interesting points there, and I of course so reading Jameson's profile here, he's a comic geek, movie nerd, father, and husband. Well, I hope he shares his experiences with his kids. I hope his kids have as much a love for comics and cartoons and all that he does. So, anyways, that's the only only article we're gonna go over tonight. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna get into the wrestling wrap up. We do kind of have quite a few things to go over. That's why I'm just getting going early here instead of going around trying to look for another story. But considering that I did get to getting the stories a little on the late side anyways. Chances are I probably wouldn't find anything anyways. So, but with that being said, let's go ahead and let me go ahead and go find the. So first off, we're gonna look back to last night's AEW show, of course. As on last night's Dynamite. The opening match saw in a six-man tag action as a kind of a prelude to the upcoming Continental title match this weekend's Grand Slam Australia between the Death Riders John Moxley and Don Callis family member Konosuke Takeshita. The Death Riders of CMLL World Heavyweight Champion Claudio Castagnoli, AEW Continental Champion John Moxley and Pac, with Marina Shafir in their corner, defeated the Don Callis family of Josh Alexander, Mark Davis, and Konosuke Takeshita. Then you had a TNT title match in which Kyle Fletcher, with Lance Archer in his corner, defeated Tommaso Ciampa to become the new TNT champion, which means Kyle Fletcher will have the honor of going back home, this weekend, because Kyle Fletcher is from Australia, of course, going back home as a TNT champion. There's been some talk that he might even defend the belt on the show this weekend, but we'll see. We'll see if that did that was announced a little later on here. Then in some way of another, in tag team action, Orange Cassidy and Roderick Strong defeated the team of Clark Connors and Daniel Garcia, in which this also after the match, as kind of an act to kind of terrorize, because Tony Storm was in the balcony watching Orange Cassidy in his match there, in a prelude up to the mixed tag match in which the loser of the fall gets their head shaved. Wheeler Yuta and Marina Shafir brought Mina Shirakawa out and cut off her ponytail, kind of send a message to Cassidy and Tony Storm. As then in a match in which in a triple threat match for the number one contendership for the AEW World Tag Titles, coming into the match, it was going to be the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson, the Rascals duo of Desmond Xavier and Myron Reed, and a mystery team. Well, that mystery team turned out to be the returning Private Party, Isaiah Cassidy and Mark Quinn. Now, of course, people, I'm sure most people who followed AEW, from its inception, know the history between Private Party and the Young Bucks. And coming back after a bit of a hiatus, it still ended up with the Young Bucks getting some clarity in their rivalry with Private Party. Private Party had two significant wins against them in previous matches, but now the Young Bucks got the win in this match to become the new number one contenders, after which they were confronted by the current AEW World Tag Team Champions, FTR, renewing their rivalry that basically saw Matt and Nick super kick Dax and Cash when they were trying the old ask a question, then pull the mic away when they go to answer. And then they kind of teased knocking out Stokely as well, who was in his chair, been claiming a leg injury or ankle injury or something like that. Then in the main event, another title change as Chris Statlander defended the AEW Women's World Title in a strap match. Now, because of their upcoming match in Australia, the Babes of Wrath, Harley Cameron and Willow Nightingale had already left for Australia, so they were not at the Toyota Arena. They were not at the Toyota Arena for during the event, which allowed the triangle of madness, the full faction, Tekla's teammates, Tekla's faction mates, Sky Blue and Julia Hart, the Sisters of Sin, came out and distracted the ref enough to help Tekla tie up Chris Statlander so she could execute a curb stomp on her to knock her out and win the title. So again, now before we do move on to what to look forward to today, there was one other piece of news came out of last night's show too. Now, this is more mainstream news, and normally I wouldn't cover stuff quite as much like this, but since it did have kind of a direct effect on the show here and could have ramifications for AEW in the long run here. So Warner Brothers Discovery, who are basically the owners right now of Netflix and owners of the platform, the TBS, and the platform that AEW airs on, they basically asked Tony Khan not to allow. It basically banned Brody King from appearing on last night's Dynamite. Now, it's been widely reported that this is due in part to the fact that Brody King has been a very outspoken opponent of ICE and its operations. And considering that Warner Brothers is in the midst of a potential sale in which they'll need the FCC's approval, and basically what it comes down to is that they don't want to do anything to basically upset Donald Trump because they know that they know that they don't want to mess with that dog, basically. And so what the thing they were worried about is, of course, one, the possibility that Brody King might come out in an Abolish ICE t-shirt, which he's been promoting of late. And also, considering that last week during the main event, which he earned his shot at MJF, he earned his shot at MJF. They were afraid that if he came out, people would start chanting, F ICE again. And Warner Brothers just didn't want that headache. Now, another kind of an interesting side story, too, in that apparently a fan was banned from entering the building to the show last night as well. I read this article, too, where apparently a fan had a Abolish ICE t-shirt on. And actually, per the venue rules, the Toyota Arena, now Ontario, California, where the event was being held, that I know that people will find this hard to believe, but that's one of the more conservative areas, right-leaning areas of California. I know people can't believe there actually are red areas of California, but there are. They're just more to the east of eastern part of California. So larger land masses, just not as much in terms of people. So, but so they banned him because they asked him to kind of flip his shirt around to where the abolished ICE would not be seen on TV, and because it was the venue's rule that they didn't want any political messaging. Now, mind you, I kind of agree overall with the whole thing on that. Professional wrestling, and as much as I really don't like the term sports entertainment a lot of times, they are an entertainment, and the whole point of engaging in entertainment is to get away from the real world garbage. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter if you're Republican, Democrat, red, blue, white, black, when you're going to watch something for entertainment purposes, you don't need to be reminded of it's meant to be an escape. And when you allow the real world to start bleeding into your escapism, then what do you have? You're gonna end up having a situation. Kind of, I'm remembering a MASH episode where and it was in the later years. It was during the time, of course, where Wayne Rogers had left the show. It had become more of a comedy, a bit more of a dramedy, as it were. But the doctors had been in a, at least according to the script, had been in a real long surgical session. And when they try to go, when they would try to go rest, they'd take little naps. And it's one of those things where, people, when you sleep, all right, when you dream, you're trying to get away from the real world, right? You're trying to get away from reality when you're dreaming. But in this episode, the war crept into their dreams, and their fears and miseries started happening in their dreams. And and when you have that, that's going to cause you problems. Same thing with entertainment. You don't want the real world creeping into your entertainment. I understand there are situations like situation comedies, but and I know there have been comedians who've made fun of politicians on both sides. Lately, though, it seems more like people are just hammering on conservatives and liberals are getting passed, but that's just my opinion. But anyways, but that's what happened on that's what happened with last night's but I would personally advise Brody King and and those who have the same ideas as him, maybe since you are dealing with a corporation here, maybe you want and they don't want to have this fight. Maybe you should just kind of just cool it with the messaging a little bit. You do have the thing is, you have to remember, yes, you do have a right to express yourself. You have the right to peacefully protest, okay? You have the right to freely express yourself. But you know something? Businesses have rights too. Businesses have a right to, right, wrong, or indifferent, cover their rear ends if they want to get stuff done. As a private business, they can kind of, to a certain extent, because you are representing the company. You're representing, which is why some people are saying, which albeit it's pretty much, I think most people who are in the know that the chances of Brody King actually winning a title from MJF are probably slim to none here, because the problem here is that your world champion is the face of your company. And what probably happened if they did try to put the title on Brody King, then you wouldn't be able to have your world champion on TV, because Warner Brothers would probably nix the idea. So, and if they want to stay competitive with the WWE, they need to keep their TV deal, and thereby they need to keep Warner Brothers Discovery happy. And Warner Brothers Discovery is trying to keep Donald Trump happy and try to keep him from doing to them what he did to CBS. So, anyways, let's move on now. Let's look ahead to tonight's TNA and Ring of Honor shows here. I'm gonna do Ring of Honor first, since TNA there's more to obviously talk about. It'll probably give us a better segue into what's coming up over the next couple of days here for TNA. But on tonight's Ring of Honor Club, coming from the Esports Stadium in Arlington, Arlington, Texas. With Caprice Coleman and Ian Riccaboni on commentary. The Ring of Honor World Tag Team titles will be on the line as La Faction Ingobernables duo of Sammy Guevara and the Beast Muertos will be taking on Top Flight of Dante and Darius Martin, Christopher Daniels in their corner. In six-man tag action, the Von Erichs, Marshall and Ross Von Erich, team with Rev Pro star Michael Oakley, with Amira and Kevin Von Erich in their corner, to take on the trio of Ode, OXP, and Teamer the Great. Another six-man tag action, Dalton Castle teams with the Outrunners of Turbo Floyd and Truth Magnum to take on Nathan Cruz, Rosario Grillo, and KM. Lance Archer is set to take on Will Alday. Again, these guys have been going back and forth with each other for a while, it seems like. Recent AEW signee and CMLL star Persephone will be taking on Julissa Mexa. And then in eight-man tag action, you have Ring of Honor World Champ Bandito teaming with Commander and Mascara Dorada and Zahua to take on the Swirl of Blake Christian and Lee Johnson, and the Premier Athlete duo of Aria Davari and Tony Nese, with Mark Sterling and Story Denali in their corner. So that's all coming out of Ring of Honor tonight. Now, as we will now take a look at TNA. Total nonstop action. Look ahead to, of course, tonight will be the go home edition of Impact on AMC. With Tom Hannafan and Matthew Rainwalt on commentary. As on tonight's Impact, from the Tingley Coliseum in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a battle of two former TNA world champions, Nick Nemeth looks to further strengthen his claim as number one contender against Rich Swann. in kind of a match that was set up in a kind of goofy way last week. In an Albuquerque street fight, intergender Albuquerque street fight, Ryan Nemeth will be taking on Mara Sade as this rivalry's been going on for the last month or so. And then in an eight-man tag action, you will see TNA World Champion Mike Santana, Moose, former TNA World TNA Triple Crown winner Moose, and the Hardys, current TNA World Tag Team Champions of Jeff and Matt Hardy, taking on the revamped system of Bear Bronson, Eddie Edwards, Brian Myers, Cedric Alexander, and Bear Bronson. As Moose in this match looks to try to get some revenge after he was unceremoniously kicked out of the system. It's also going to be interesting to see what's going on with Alicia Edwards. Apparently, she's felt kind of split here, as she did not seem to be on. She was not even told what the part of the plan in which they were going to turn on Moose. So, or Johnny for that matter, but with that being said, so now that's what's to look forward to tonight. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going to be going down on tomorrow's No Surrender as well. And I'll talk a bit more about No Surrender, of course, tomorrow night as well. But this is coming from the Pinnacle in Nashville, Tennessee. 4 matches have been signed for the No Surrender pay-per-view tomorrow night. We'll, of course, reiterate those tomorrow as well. Channing Lorenzo will be defending the TNA International title against Trey Miguel. As Trey Miguel cashes in the briefcase he scored during the Feast or Fired match. In 8-man tag action, you will see TNA World Tag Team Champions, the Hardys, Jeff and Matt Hardy, teaming with the Righteous, Dutch and Vincent, in a strange pairing to say the least. Going up against Order 4 of Mustafa Ali, the Great Hands, Jason Hotch and John Schuyler, and Secret Agent Zero. In a match for the TNA Knockouts World title, Lei Ying Lee will be defending against Ariana Grace, as it looks like the challengers are lining up to take on Lei Ying Lee, as of course Danny Luna still owed her title shot that she earned, but due to, of course, the visa issues, she has not been able to come back to the States. You also got Ash by Elegance returning to in-ring action after what was believed to be a career-ending injury. And then also in tag team action, you will see Eddie Edwards of the System teaming with Nick Nemeth, basically the top 2 contenders right now, as Eddie Edwards has the briefcase for the world title that he earned at the Feast or Fired match at last month's Genesis. They'll be taking on the duo of TNA World Champion Mike Santana and the returning X Division champion Leon Slater, who also had been having some visa issues and now will be back is now scheduled to be back in the States to be involved in this match. So, as of course, Leon Slater will have a challenger waiting for him as well in the wings, as Eric Young secured the briefcase at Feast or Fire for an X Division title shot. That's going to be interesting to say the least. So, with that being said, let's go ahead now and take a quick peek at what's going to be going down Saturday. Let's get an updated card for Saturday's Grand Slam Australia. See, there had been any changes to the match card. So coming from the Qudos Bank Arena in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia, this Saturday, and airing on TNT. The matches that have been signed include AEW Continental Champion Jon Moxley defending against Konosuke Takeshita in continuation of the feud between the Death Riders and the Don Callis family in a mixed tag team match in which the loser of the fall will get their head shaved. We'll see Orange Cassidy and Tony Storm take on the Death Riders duo of Marina Shafir and Wheeler Yuta. In a match for the AEW Women's World Tag Team titles, in a match in which the challengers earned the title shot on last week's Dynamite, the Babes of Wrath, Harley Cameron, and Willow Nightingale will be defending the titles against Mega Bad of Megan Bayne and Penelope Ford. In a number one contenders match for the AEW World title, Andrade El Idolo will be taking on Hangman Adam Page. Then, in a ladder match, Kyle Fletcher defends the TNT title in his home of Australia against former champ Mark Briscoe. And in the main event, as previously mentioned, for the AEW World title, MJF will be defending against Brody King, who earned his title shot on last week's Dynamite. So that's all we got for the wrestling wrap up for you guys. Anyways, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look back at this date in Neat history. History. So let's see. 1997, 2001, 2011, and 2011. All right, so first off, we're going to head back 29 years ago, as on this date, 29 years ago, the 1030th issue of 2000 AD from Fleetway UK went on sale on this date back in 1997. It sold for £1.10. And was 32 pages. So 29 years ago, the 1030th issue of 2000 AD went on sale in the UK on this date back in 1997. Of course, this is a title that had apparently been running since it ran from I think 1977 to 2010. So it had a pretty long, lengthy run, as it were. All right. So, anyways, moving along to the next piece of niche history, as it were. Oops. We move ahead to the year 2001, which was, of course, 25 years ago. As on this date, 25 years ago today, in 2001. WCW held what would be its last go-home show for its last ever Super Brawl pay-per-view, Super Brawl Revenge, on this date back in 2001, They held it from the Mississippi Coast Coliseum in Biloxi, Mississippi. The main event saw in a match for the WCW World Heavyweight title, Scott Steiner with Medeja in his corner, retained over Kevin Nash, who had David Flair in his corner, by DQ. Other matches on the night included Dustin Rhodes defeating Rick Steiner in a non-title match, as I believe Rick Steiner was the TV champion at the time. Actually, in the previous, the no contest earlier in the night as well between the two. In a commissionership match, Lance Storm defeated the Cat, become the new WCW commissioner. Other matches include Sean Stasiak taking on his former tag partner Chuck Palumbo, Billy Kidman taking on Elix Skipper, Yang taking on Lash Legend. So, 25 years ago, the Go Home Raw before the last Super Bowl pay-per-view for WCW. And normally I would say this in between, but since we're going to be hitting them both at the same time pretty much, 2011 is just so nice that we're going to hit it twice. As on this date in 2011, 15 years ago today, you had the 8th season premiere of The Fairly Odd Parents on Nickelodeon, and you also had, aside from the 8th season premiere of Fairly Odd Parents, you also had the Cartoon Network debut of Pokemon Black and White on this date. So on this date, you had, on Nickelodeon, you had the premiere of the 8th season of Fairly Odd Parents, and you had on Cartoon Network, the Cartoon Network premiere of Pokemon Black and White. The English dub, of course. So, with that being said, I thank everybody for being here tonight. Hope you all enjoyed the show. Back here with more Niche News tomorrow, and of course, this Sunday, I'll be joined by Sabrina from Devil Flyer Momentum, as we'll be taking another trip down Comics History Lane, looking at Marvel comic that came out in August of 1940. So with that, I thank y'all for being here tonight, and I hope to see y'all back here tomorrow. Bye.